Behind the Fold. Written and narrated by Riley Wright. Chapter 5. Torrential rain hammered the old tin roof as Kevin climbed out of bed. He stretched, yawning loudly, and peered into the dusty mirror above the dresser. His head no longer hurt, and he was in desperate need of a shower. He removed the remaining bandages, chuckling at his hair, which stuck up at odd angles. All that remained of the ordeal was a thin pink scar. Given enough time, it too would disappear beneath his growing, unkempt hair. "Not looking like a Starfleet officer now, am I?" he asked his disheveled reflection. The days were starting to bleed together. He was no longer certain of his ability to escape this, after Admiral Kozak's unexpected visit, which left him feeling even more powerless. The Admiral had strongly suggested, though the suggestion carried the weight of a warning, that Kevin remain where he was until he received his next assignment. When he tried to voice his confusion and solicit information regarding the Enterprise, Kozak shut him down. He said that an investigation of sorts had been conducted of what little remained of the vessel, and that Kevin's further involvement could hinder his future in Starfleet. "I truly am sorry for your loss, Mr. Riley. Take all the time you need to mourn, but don't go chasing ghosts across the galaxy. As a Starfleet officer, you must be flexible, able to let go and move on from one assignment to another," Kozak told him in what he believed to be a fatherly manner. Kevin started the shower, his cheeks blushing in both anger and embarrassment, as he recalled how the rest of the conversation had played out. "With all due respect, sir," he said icily, "this isn't about chasing ghosts, but fulfilling my duty. I can't take on a new assignment until I'm certain about what happened and have seen the evidence with my own eyes." Kozak chuckled. "But you have seen it with your own eyes. Your first-hand report only confirms what my team discovered." He sighed, picking up an old picture frame, which displayed Kevin's parents. They were happily smiling. His mother held him, a baby of no more than 3 weeks old at the time. "You're no stranger to loss, I know that. But could it be possible that your experiences have sown a distrust for those in authority?" Kozak asked. "Son, you may do as you wish, but I want you to seriously ask yourself why you feel this way. Why you think Starfleet is lying to you." I didn't say that," Kevin stammered. "I just thought there might be something they missed during the investigation." "So you believe that Starfleet is careless, then?" "You're putting words in my mouth, sir, and I don't appreciate it." Kozak gently placed the picture back upon the end table, his expression unreadable as Kevin tried desperately to rein in his temper. "It would seem that I have visited you prematurely, Mr. Riley. You are still emotionally compromised, and I don't blame you for it. I will end our conversation with this." He eyed him severely. "Be careful. Whatever you decide could pose serious risk to your future in Starfleet. We need explorers who can also fill the role of soldiers. I am concerned for you should you continue down this path." He stood, turning to leave. "Consider what I said, son. It's not too late to change your mind, to let the dead bury the dead and embrace a new adventure." With that, he was gone. Once the initial anger wore off, Kevin did consider his words. Do I really distrust authority? After Governor Kodos had ordered the execution of his parents, and 4,000 more, all under the guise of survival, He had every reason to distrust the decisions of those in power. But never once had he questioned Starfleet. They stood for peace, unity, the Federation of Planets, justice. No one man pulled the strings. It was shared, and only given to those who deserved it, those who had proven themselves worthy of its mantle. What Kodos did was inexcusable. Starfleet never would have allowed such a heinous crime to go unpunished. It was Kevin's desire to protect other colonists, other worlds, from such ruthless dictators that, in part, led to him joining Starfleet Academy. The other reason was that he craved space, the vast unknowns of the final frontier. He leaned against the shower wall, letting the hot water wash away his sorrows. It wasn't as fast or efficient as the Enterprise's sonic showers, a comparison that immediately made his chest ache. Still, he was beginning to understand why his grandparents never updated their little cabin in the woods. It brought them back to a simpler time, and an overall less complicated life. He could appreciate that, if anything for the peace that came with it. A knock rapped softly upon the bathroom door, disrupting his thoughts. "Kevin, dear, there's someone here to see you," called his grandmother over the sound of rushing water. Here? To see me? He wondered, as he turned off the spigot and began to dry off. "I'll be right there, Gran," he acknowledged, climbing out of the tub. "I think he said his name is Spot. Such a handsome fellow. Is he a friend from the academy?" she asked, curiously through the keyhole. Kevin nearly slipped on the wet tile, just catching himself on the sink's edge. "Gran, you're confusing him with my old dog. It's Spock, not Spot. Spock, he hissed through the crack in the door, tearing on dry clothes as fast as he could muster. As if I'll let her call him that to his face before I can stop it. Spock waited patiently downstairs, studying the small, homey cabin in polite interest as Kevin's grandfather sipped a mug of coffee, watching him. He looked away as his wife returned. "He's almost ready. Seems very excited you're here. Could I interest you in some coffee?" she offered kindly. Her husband rolled his eyes. "Marge, you should clean your glasses. He's Vulcan." Spock raised an eyebrow in amusement. "Thank you, Miss Riley. I shall have a cup, please. Black, I believe is the term." She shot her husband a long-suffering look. "Forgive him, dear. He's not used to visitors. I'll be right back." She rushed off into the kitchen, leaving them in awkward silence. Spock still leaned upon his cane. "What a surprise. I guess Vulcans aren't all the same." "You're the other survivor from my boy's ship," the man asked, gesturing to the sofa across from him. Spock seated gratefully. "You are correct. I am, or rather was, Mr. Riley's commander, as well as first science officer aboard the ship." He seemed impressed. "Commander and first officer, eh? That's a lot of responsibility for one man." His wife returned, handing Spock a steaming cup, which he accepted in thanks. They all turned as Kevin entered. He still wasn't completely dry, causing his clothes to cling to him, and his hair refused to lay flat as he awkwardly brushed it back. He beamed at Spock. For the first time since waking in the hospital, Kevin no longer felt alone. Every doctor, every admiral, every official had looked at him with pity. Spock was different. He had been there. He had seen it too. In light of his relief, he also felt the urge to snicker at the sight of his superior dressed so informally. The Vulcan wore a maroon sweater underneath a black rain jacket, with raindrops still glistening upon the shoulders, and blue jeans with brown hiking boots. The Irish spring temperatures didn't seem to agree with him. He clutched the steaming cup of coffee close, as if welcoming the warmth it provided. Spock stood, pleased to see his officer fully recovered. Kevin noticed that he, on the other hand, was still recovering, leaning on a black cane and favoring his midsection. He had also lost considerable weight, causing his clothes to sag upon his tall stature. "Hello, sir. I'm honored," he said as Spock studied him. "It was my intention to see you before your transport to Earth. Unfortunately, I was still unconscious at the time." Kevin could hardly contain his questions or his relief. Spock was the only one in Starfleet he could trust, and his visit surely meant that the feeling was mutual. Why else would he come all the way from Vulcan to see him? "Commander, I've been wanting to speak to you. Spock raised a hand. "Mr. Riley, I am no longer your commander. As for what you wish to discuss, perhaps we could take a walk," he offered. Kevin glanced out the window, glad to see the sun shining through dark clouds. He looked over his shoulder as they departed down the winding trail behind the cabin, spotting his grandparents' pale faces watching him from the living room window. "They really need to get a life," he thought, quietly shooing them. Spock noticed this out of the corner of his eye and smirked ever so slightly in amusement. The rain had only made the spring flowers more fragrant and beautiful, with droplets shining and dripping like diamonds in the sunlight. In the distance, a rainbow stood sharp against the dark backside of the storm. Spock paused, looking up at it, as if remembering something, or was it someone? Kevin watched as well until it faded, all too soon, like beauty itself. "You probably don't see anything like that on Vulcan, do you, sir?" he asked. "No, nor do we encounter many rainstorms." "Sir, why exactly are you here?" Kevin blurted, unable to avoid the subject any longer. "On the surface, I am here to visit my relatives in San Francisco. My parents are there now," he explained. "More importantly, I wanted to confer with you about the accident, alone." Kevin swallowed, more than ready to speak freely about what others had forbidden. "This is about the way Starfleet's been acting, right? I thought I was going crazy, but they're giving you the cold shoulder too, aren't they?" Spock glanced around, making sure they weren't being watched, and continued walking. Kevin fell in step beside him eagerly. "Could you please tell me what you remember?" Spock inquired. Kevin rubbed his chin, recalling how Spock had very easily and quickly gathered information through what the Vulcans called a mind meld. "What if I show you instead? You can read my mind, see what I've seen. I'm worried I'll leave out something important otherwise," he suggested. Spock didn't immediately respond, but seemed to be mulling it over deeply. He raised an eyebrow at him. "Generally, a mind link is only used when all other means fail, although I am admittedly curious about your memories." "Does that mean you'll do it, sir?" "It requires a great deal of concentration and vulnerability on my part. But if you are certain and have fully recovered from your injury, I am willing." Kevin smirked. "I'm not exactly a poet, sir. This gets me off the hook." "I would not take this lightly, Mr. Riley. If it were not for the severity of the situation we find ourselves in, I would not permit it at all." A branch snapped somewhere in the woods. Both men froze instantly. Their motion startled a deer, which tore off through the woods and out of sight. Spock sighed, relaxing. Do you know of a location that is relatively hidden? Kevin tried to remember. It had been some time since he walked these trails with his grandfather, as he was teaching him to hunt. He vaguely recalled a rock face by a stream, which they had camped under once or twice. It's a bit of a walk, but I know a place that's safe enough. He glanced at Spock's cane, uncertain. If you're up for it, sir. Spock gestured for him to lead the way. It was tiresome, even for him, to walk so far after lying around for over 2 months, recuperating. Kevin wiped his brow, breathing heavily and longing for another shower. Plus his stomach grumbled in protest, having skipped breakfast. Spock kept pace, his face betraying only the slightest discomfort as they navigated the slippery, overgrown trail. Soon, to Kevin's relief, he could hear the stream beckoning him. It was louder than usual, due to the recent rainfall. He was pleased that the water hadn't risen past the bank as the cliff came into view. Will this do, sir? Kevin asked, bending down by the rushing stream and splashing his face. It was cooler there, and smelled strongly of damp earth and pine. This is adequate. I must first warn you that our actions may jeopardize our positions, and quite possibly our careers, he stated seriously. Kevin shrugged. To be honest, if my fears are true, I no longer want a career in Starfleet. I joined because I believed in what it stood for. He faced Spock, eyes pleading. Please tell me that hasn't changed, sir. Spock leaned his cane against the rock wall and approached him. His face was expressionless, but his voice was lined with optimism as he replied. That depends on you, Mr. Riley, and others like you. The future of Starfleet is in your hands. So long as you hold true to its ideals, they will not easily fade. He steepled his hands in concentration. Kevin waited, somewhat hesitant to let someone into his head now that he had made the decision. Spock reached out toward him. Kevin closed his eyes as Spock's fingers settled gently against his face. My mind to your mind, my thoughts to your thoughts, Spock began, and Kevin immediately felt euphoria wash over him, as if he were floating, dreaming. He also sensed Spock's presence and caught a glimpse of who he really was, beyond the facade, the mask he wore. Uhura was right all along, he thought, realizing afterwards that Spock could hear him. The image of Uhura elicited a swell of fondness from the Vulcan, causing Kevin to smile automatically. It was startling how different the real Spock felt from the one everyone thought they knew. Beneath it all was an ocean of sadness that threatened to consume everything. Spock quickly diverted him back into his own mind. Now to the incident, Mr. Riley. He gently withdrew the memory. Kevin was surprised at how easily and quickly his mind recalled the event, with Spock's consciousness to guide him. Riley, did you finish the report yet? Chief Engineer Scott asked. Kevin scrambled to attention. It's nearly complete, sir. I'll have it on your desk in an hour. Mr. Scott shook his head and chuckled softly. All right, lad. At ease. I'd rather be handed a thorough report in the morning than a rushed one tonight. Aye, sir. The scene changed. Kevin was checking the last system off his list in exhaustion. In order to give Mr. Scott a more thorough report, he had decided to run tests on all of the systems, not calculating the time it would take to do so. The reactor room was quiet, as most off-duty personnel were already counting sheep. He really missed communications. If it wasn't for the short staffing, he would be there now. Fortunately, this was a temporary problem, as more officers were to rendezvous with their vessel at their next shore leave on Ryza. He trudged over to his workstation, tossing the report upon his seat. He would hand it in first thing in the morning, after a well-deserved rest. He was just about to exit the room when he noticed a strange flash of light erupt from the warp core. No sooner had it happened than it was gone. Kevin blinked, rubbing his eyes and chalking it up to lack of sleep. All the systems had been checked, and the Enterprise's engine was purring like a kitten, as Mr. Scott would say. Reassured, he again turned. The console closest to him suddenly burst, sending shrapnel and sparks flying. From there, everything went dark and unfocused. He heard jumbled voices and saw the slightest shadow of Dr. McCoy as he administered emergency aid to his head injury and lacerations before nothing. Spock then replayed everything that had transpired afterwards, pausing and examining the moments when Kevin felt uneasy and distrustful. He took an even particular interest in his visit with Admiral Kozak. Kevin could feel his blood course with anger afresh at having to relive the unpleasant scene. But his anger was multiplied and twisted tenfold by Spock's own primal emotions. It was like a hot flame, causing Kevin to wince in discomfort. The Vulcan removed his hand slowly, releasing him from the meld. Kevin felt disoriented and tired. Spock steered him to a boulder and sat him against it. "I am sorry about the emotional transference. It cannot always be helped," he said, folding his arms, so that Kevin would not see them shaking. "It's okay, sir. That was an interesting experience." Kevin shook his head, trying to clear it, along with the last visage of rage. A cold sweat had broken out across his forehead. "And I thought Vulcans had no feelings." "So you're, not fond of the Admiral either, I take it?" Spock raised an eyebrow. "I find him to be manipulative and distrustful, possibly even sinister." He studied Kevin, thinking back. "As for your recollection of the incident, I discovered that we share a similar discongruity." "What do you mean?" "Your memories preceding the explosion were strangely out of focus, whereas for the slightest moment, when you saw Dr. McCoy, it was not." Kevin scratched his head in confusion. "Aren't all memories kind of out of focus?" "Humans and Vulcans generally retain memories differently. We pride ourselves at being meticulously detailed. Emotions tend to have an adverse effect on the clarity of what is remembered. In some situations, they can even change what really occurred." Kevin still wore a look of perplexion. Spock clarified further. "In other words, Mr. Riley, when you recall a memory, you are actually recalling how you felt, more so than objective truth. Nevertheless, we both clearly remember McCoy, unlike anything else." He grabbed his cane, while Kevin straightened, still slightly euphoric, but less so, after being schooled on how awful his memory is. They started back down the trail, both lost in troubled thought. "Does this mean that our minds have been tampered with, altered somehow?" Kevin asked after a while, dreading his response. Spock kept his gaze trained forward, uncharacteristically hesitant to answer. he finally replied. It is possible. But the method eludes me. A mind link alone would not be sufficient. I may not be fully Vulcan, but I am still quite able to defend myself from most telepathic attacks. His eyes narrowed slightly. I should think that even the best attempts would be flawed. How would we know? Kevin asked. By how our subconscious mind responds to certain individuals, particularly the Admiral and healer Erevik. Kevin had blown off his general dislike of the Admiral, believing it was a universal one. But he had forgotten his initial feelings toward Erevik, having only met the aged Vulcan once before being transported home. After all, the feeling of unease toward the physician didn't make sense. It was as if he had met him before, as in a nightmare. The feeling reminded Kevin of when he first saw Kodos, disguised as a traveling actor called Anton Caridian, performing on board the Enterprise. He may have been a broken old man, living under a new identity, but Kevin knew better. Never could he forget that face, that voice. Mr. Riley? Kevin blinked, forcing the unpleasant memory aside. Spock was right. When it came to humans, details weren't important, only how one felt. The more powerful the emotion, the less clarity there was. I'm sorry, sir. It's just the way I felt about Erevik wasn't much different than when I saw Caridian. I pushed the feeling aside because I'd never met him before, or so I thought. Indeed, I suffered a great deal of mental trauma upon awakening at the hospital. I failed to realize that such an injury could only have been wrought by a telepath and not a physical wound. It was midday by the time the cabin came into view. Kevin was now very hungry. His mouth watered at the sight of his grandfather steaming vegetables in a pot over a fire alongside a chicken, which slowly rotated over the flames beside it. He looked up and waved at them. Kevin went to approach, but Spock gently stopped him. Remember that anything you say could also jeopardize them. One who would go so far to erase our memories may go farther still to keep the truth concealed. You mean they'd actually kill us? For all we know, Mr. Riley, they may still plan to. It was late. Kevin could hear his grandfather's snores echoing through the dusty old floorboards. He still couldn't believe that a Vulcan was in his room, meditating in the far corner on a pull-out bed while he tried to sleep on his old, moth-eaten mattress. After their trek, Spock had decided to join him and his family for dinner, per his grandmother's invitation. Kevin felt it was only fair to extend it further by offering him a place to stay. It was getting late, and Spock didn't seem to be in a hurry to return to San Francisco. Difficulty sleeping? Spock asked above the snores. Kevin swallowed. I'm just not used to having a senior officer in my old room. Particularly a Vulcan one. No matter. I must leave before dawn. Spock sat up rather stiffly. Do you wish to accompany me? To California? Not entirely. My mother's relatives are not fond of my father and I. Our visit is merely a guise. I intend to return to space and set course toward the Cygni system. Kevin propped himself up on his elbow in interest. What's there? A set of coordinates. Possibly the location where we were discovered. What about Erevik? Shouldn't we question him first? Spock shook his head. I suspect that such a task would prove difficult, if not impossible. Starfleet is watching. And if Erevik is guilty of infiltrating our minds, he is no novice to mental control. He leaned back upon the mattress once more, and Kevin mirrored the motion. For now, I would prefer that we keep this information to ourselves. The only reason Starfleet has not taken action against us is because they still believe we are ignorant. What about your parents? Didn't you tell them everything? Kevin questioned. No. Spock paused. If I had, we might not have made it this far. Erevik surely would not. Kevin thought it over. This was his chance, one that, without Spock, would probably never come again. But in taking this leap, he was putting his career at further risk, and more importantly, his life. He glanced over at Spock in the semi-darkness, his voice determined and set. What time do we leave?